Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back from another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Massey understands America first, MAGA doesn't, posted by Jedi Porcupine, and that looks like a screenshot of a tweet from Thomas Massey, who tweeted, "The price of gas has gone up 47 cents, and the price of diesel has gone up 83 cents in 10 days due to war with Iran, and waging war costs American taxpayers about $1 billion per day, which comes out to $10 per family per day, or $100 since the war began. This isn't America first." And I would agree with that. Trump on the campaign trail, he constantly talked about America first, but it looks like in office he's more Israel first than anything else. That's pretty much the biggest reason why we're bombing Iran. I guess you could also say it's oil and to install a new Western-backed regime in there. But, I definitely do think Israel is probably one of the biggest reasons. And yeah, personally, if Trump wants to justify what everyone's justify, if he wants to justify putting the interests of Israel above the interests of America, that's fine. But eventually, there's gonna arise a real America First movement, hopefully, that will actually put the interests of America first and not the interest of foreign countries first. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have latest script just dropped. Short-term pain for long-term gain, posted by Donald Key, and that's cross-post from the Bartia stock market subreddit. And that looks like a bunch of people, I guess, saying that short-term pain for long-term gain on like Fox News. A bunch of clips of people saying that. One of the clips looks like it's from CNN. One of the clips looks like it's from State Affairs. Yeah, personally, if people want to say that the Iran war is short-term pain for long-term gain, people should be able to say whatever they want to, but, ultimately, I think the libertarian position is, we shouldn't have any pain for any gain. If people if people want to voluntarily try and overthrow the government in Iran, I think that's fine. But if the U.S. Bombing Iran, if people I think want to voluntarily, I'm all for voluntary taxation. People want to voluntarily send their tax dollars to that cause. I personally wouldn't be as against it. But right now, under forced collectivism, people are pretty much forced to send their tax dollars to Iran, whether they want to or not. And I don't think that's very libertarian. I think libertarian is all about freedom of choice. If you want to support bombing Iran and pay money for that, I think you should be able to. I personally would be still against it, though, because I don't think you should just be bombing other countries. But regardless, ultimately, I think that should be an individual choice, whether an individual wants to support it or not. But right now, you're being forced to support it under the forced collectivist system of the U.S. government currently, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have the billionaire oligarchs pushing for war with Iran, posted by FlimsyAl5563, and that looks like a YouTube video from More Perfect Union. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for the billionaire interest pushing for war with Iran, but Reddit, they only care about billionaires when they're against them. They support billionaires when they're on their side. Like if you look at people like George Soros or Pierre Omidyar or J.B. Pritzker, they're all billionaires. But Reddit either downplays their actions when it comes to influencing politics or outright supports them. And it just goes to show you that, ultimately it just matters who's the in-group, who's in the out-group. Reddit usually acts like it's against the billionaire oligarchs, but they seem to exclusively believe whatever the billionaire oligarch-funded legacy media says in regards to narratives. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Fox News has turned into complete state propaganda. While other news outlets showed the real footage, Fox News showed a video from last December to hide the fact that Trump was wearing a baseball cap during the dignified transfer of 6 departed soldiers. They're trying so hard to make him look good, posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross-post from the Facepalm subreddit, which looks like it's since been removed. And yeah, personally, I would agree that Fox News is state propaganda, but all legacy media is, but Reddit only seems to care about Fox News is being state propaganda because it's controlled opposition. They wouldn't care if they don't care that ABC News is state propaganda or that NBC News is state propaganda. They do increasingly care that CBS News is state propaganda because they sold it to the member of the out group and Barry Weiss. But, other than that, it's really just CBS and Fox that they'll call out being state propaganda, while I would argue all corporate legacy media is state propaganda. But, stuff like ABC News, NBC News, CNN, MSNBC or MS Now, I guess. No one calls it that. Everyone pretty much calls it MSNBC. They're all state propaganda too, but Reddit would never call them out for being state propaganda because they're more in-group coded than out-group coded, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have U.S. Healthcare Free Market Myth from Cato.org, posted by FastCRunus739, and that's crosspost from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit. And they added, in a free market, government would control 0% of health spending, yet the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, reports that the United States government controls 84% of health spending. In fact, government controls a larger share of health spending in the United States than 27 of 38 OECD member nations, including the United Kingdom 83% and Canada 73%, each of which have an explicitly socialized healthcare system. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, ultimately, if people do want the government to pay for their healthcare and want to have voluntary taxation to do that, I think they should be able to. But right now, the U.S. has a system where it's not all government run, it's not all private run, but it's really the worst of both worlds in that regard. The ACA pretty much is taking the worst parts of private run health insurance, the worst parts of government run health insurance, and mashing them together. And that's why I think you have to repeal it as soon as possible. In an ideal libertarian world, I would say the government wouldn't be involved in health matters at all. But I do think if people do want to have the government involved in health matters and consent to it as such, for in regards to themselves, I think they should be able to. If they want the government to pay for their health, if they want to pay for government health insurance through voluntary taxation, I think they should be able to. But right now, you have a system that is trying to please everybody, but ultimately pleases nobody. Next we have, is the Springboard a progressive or a libertarian? Is there a difference? Posted by Gnome Sane, and that's a video, that's a meme of, it was that one protester outside, the counter protester outside the New York City mayor's office, and he's saying the coexist, like all the liberal women have on their bumper stickers. They had the Muslim moon for the C, then the peace sign for the O, the two genders for the E, well, I guess you can't really, there's not, people, they don't really say two genders anymore because, it's however many genders I guess you want to say there are. I guess that's libertarian position. I personally would say there are only two, but but yeah, they have the E with the two genders and then the Jewish star, and then the I, and then the yin yang for the S, and then the cross for the T, the Christian cross, and then it's the Muslim throwing the nail bomb, running behind him saying Allah Akbar. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, you shouldn't be justifying throwing bombs at people, but of course Reddit, they're trying to downplay this, since I'm sure if it was a white Christian nationalist throwing the nail bomb, it would be all over the front page of Reddit. But since it's a brown Muslim teenager throwing the nail bomb, Reddit's trying to downplay it as much as possible, since Muslims are more in-group than out-group when it comes to the progressive worldview. Because I would say in a lot of ways Islam is more regressive than Christianity is. But, Reddit needs to support him because most Muslims are brown, and, that's very much how the progressive worldview works. If someone's brown, they're oppressed, so therefore you gotta support whatever they believe in. And that just goes to show you, they have no principles, only whatever the narrative says. So yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, you shouldn't be throwing bombs at other people. But, ultimately, people are going to justify what they justify. If they want to justify throwing bombs at other people who are just protesting peacefully, that's on them. I think it's interesting that the mayor, Mamdani, he said, the protesters were white extremists, right-wing extremists, but he said, there was a nail bomb thrown. He didn't mention that they were the people throwing the nail bomb were Muslim extremists. It just goes to show you, people are just going to say whatever fits their narrative. They'll always try and put as much blame on the out-group as possible, while always playing defense for the in-group. And that's very much how modern politics works, I would say. Pretty much, actually, I would say that's how politics has always kind of worked, but, it's definitely never been more apparent than the age of social media, I would say. Next, we have Texas Representative Andy Hopper proposes a law to ban Islam in state. In the state of Texas, we get to define what a religion is, and Islam is not a religion protected under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, from FortWorthReport.org, posted by Ninja Lover, and that's crosspost from the Law subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think that, I don't really, I do really, that some people who use Islam justify some horrible things. But you can say the same about pretty much any religion. So I don't think you should be able to ban in Islam or any religion. If you don't want to consider that define Islam as a religion, for yourself, I think that's fine. Define whatever you want to as a religion. But ultimately, religion shouldn't be. You shouldn't have the government justify banning any religions. Ultimately, it's voluntary collectivism of whether you choose to be religious or not, and that's very much what the founders knew. That's why they intended for the First Amendment, freedom of religion. And as I said, personally, people have used religion to justify some bad things, but that doesn't mean you should just make it illegal. That's very much the Reddit position. I'm sure if this text representative was saying he wanted to ban all religions instead of just Islam, the Reddit would be completely fine with it. But since he's just singling out Islam, a religion that is mostly practiced by darker skinned people, as I mentioned earlier, Reddit will always defend it. So that's my thoughts there. Ultimately, you shouldn't be justifying using the state to ban anything that you don't like. It's fine to not like Islam, just like it's fine to not like Christianity or atheism or any other religion. But you shouldn't be using the state to justify banning it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Trump press secretary says Trump is wisely not ruling out the draft. Also, Barron Trump is now exempt from the draft, from xcancel.com, posted by Woke Boogeyman. And that looks like a tweet from Call to Activism. W2F, Carolyn Levitt refuses to rule out initiating a draft to send Americans to fight in Iran. It's not part of the current plan right now, with the president wisely keeping his options on the table. Translation, they won't even promise your kids aren't next. And yeah, personally, I don't know how likely a draft is. I don't think this is going to end up being a massive boots on the ground invasion like Iraq, considering that how disastrous that turned out for the Republican Party. But ultimately, I think if the government does want to institute a draft, ultimately it can justify instituting whatever it wants to, and oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. With that being said, I think like 75% of the draftable age people like myself, we aren't fit for military service because we're on like SSRIs or something. That's why I was deemed unfit for military service, because I'm on SSRI. I tried to register in the past. But, ultimately, it just goes to show you that, if they do want to institute a draft, sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. I personally don't think it's that likely, though. And then the OP added in the description, Barron's exemption. He links to an article from AOL. Barron Trump's unusual medical reason that saw us from being drafted into World War III, and that looks like AOL is used to list an article from the Mirror. And yeah, personally, I think a lot of Americans, are, as I said, aren't eligible to serve. Including, I guess that Barron Trump's probably one of those. Looks like, I don't know what his excuse is, but if ultimately, I think it's all just kind of a moot point, since I don't think a draft is that likely. But ultimately, if there is a draft, the government can send anyone it wants to, and they have the legal force of the state to justify enforcing that on them. So oftentimes there's nothing really you can do about it if they do institute a draft. But as I said, I don't think it's that likely personally. And I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.